Right.
Yeah.
Working, yay, life is good. All right, so we're going to continue on. Now we're actually going to get into the RenderMan interface a little bit more and actually go in and start doing some rendering. Just to show you guys how to do it, because today it's all about learning how to use rendering. That's your project. In fact, let me talk a little bit about that, since that kind of seems to make sense at this point. So here is your lesson 1 activity. All right, so objectives, outcomes, basically we want you guys to understand the basics, the foundations of rendering using Maya, using Pixar's RenderMan. All right, we give you guys pre-lit scenes. That means I've done the lighting for you. All you need to do is open them up. The cameras are already locked down, so there is a render cam, which means we've got a camera angle we want you to use.
Okay.
Now you can go outside that camera angle, go into perspective, and spin around and navigate anywhere you want. But when you go to render, use the render cam. That way it will render from the right place.
Okay.
Right? We give you a choice of 4 scenes you can look at. You're going to choose 2 of the 4. Right? So here are references. So they're environments, because they present probably the most common thing you guys are going to be doing. Whether you're working in games or you're working in computer animation, you're going to be working in an environment of some type. We very rarely just focus in on a still life or a single object. Most of the time you have environments like these that maybe a character moves through or there's something going on. All right, so you'll notice underneath each of the render samples that I have up there, there is what's called a camera focal length. Now, like I said, I don't go into a lot of photography, but I try and give you guys the basics of what I think you're going to need. And one of them is being able to use a camera other than Maya's default focal length. They talk to you guys in modeling about focal length at all for cameras? All right, you know what? I usually save this till the end, but let me go over it now, because it's worth you guys understanding why we're talking about this at this particular point. So, cameras, lenses, whether it happens to be your phone you're using or whether you've got, a digital single lens reflex or you've got an auto camera, doesn't matter. You are still taking a picture using a glass lens or high quality plastic, but most of the time it is glass because glass gives us the best optics. All right, so most of our cameras that we have autofocus functions, right? You point, you wait, you click the button, you wait a second, the camera determines what it thinks you want to focus in on, and it focuses in on that area. And then it will take the picture. So modern cameras do a whole bunch of great stuff for us. But when you get into the higher end usage, where you are specifically stating what kind of lens you want to use to get a different visual effect, then the game changes a little bit. All right, but in general, lenses do a couple of things. They can either focus light or disperse it. These things help focus light, at least for me. Not as good as I'd like them to at all times, but they work for the most part. Right? We can disperse light. That means we can blur it, diffuse it, disperse it, make it spread around. Now, camera lenses for professional grade cameras, and we're talking about cameras that are used in film, in TV, even in games, because we're still trying to mimic the real world for the most part. All right, they can be broken down into 4 categories. The first category is called a fisheye lens. Fisheye lens gets its name from the top part of the glass that is curved just like a fish's eye, laying there in the cold, crushed ice of the deli case looking at you. Or laying on your plate after it's been cooked. So, it creates a very specific look. How many here have looked out the peephole of a door? Okay, most of us have, right? Security, peepholes, or just in general. They are basically a fisheye lens. They distort the image or the world that we look through to give us a 180 view. Right, when you look out the peephole of a door, you can pretty much almost see 180. You can see down, you can see to the sides, you can see all around. Right? So what's happening is, it's the shape of the lens, that curved top, that helps create that. But it also gives us this kind of what we call barrel distortion. It looks like you're looking through a cylinder almost. Right? Caused, again, by that shape of the lens. Now, fisheye lens is not only determined by the shape of the lens at the top, but also the distance from the camera sensor to the back of the lens glass. The longer the distance, the longer the lens, the different the properties are of it. So this is a very short distance, 2.5 millimeters to 15. And everything in cameras is measured in millimeters. Again, it's distance. So the shorter the lens, the smaller the lens, the more curved it is, you get this barrel distortion, this kind of peephole door look. We're shrinking the image that we see outside onto either the film or, in the case of us looking out the window, into our eye. Does that make sense? Now, the very next lens category is something that is used quite often in most cameras. In fact, most smartphones have a wide-angle lens because it kind of gives us the best of both worlds. It does not distort the image as much as a fisheye, but it kind of gives us a bigger, expansive view of the world. We do get a little bit of distortion in it, but we are still shrinking the image onto the lens, or onto the film, or onto this camera sensor. Now, you see the picture up there. Wide-angle lenses still have a little bit of curvature to the top of them. That's kind of why you kind of get this little, kind of stretched distortion. Her face, her nose is kind of stretched out a little bit more than the environment in the back there. Again, very specific look. The most common usage for this is real estate photos. How many people saw their apartment online before you came here? Right, you look at it online, it goes, wow, man, it's a palace. And you get here and you open the door and it's like, okay, there's the bathroom, there's the kitchen, there's the bedroom. It looks much bigger because they use wide-angle lenses. Makes everything look kind of expansive. Not to the point of being recognizably distorted like a fisheye, but it creates that kind of expansive, sweeping view that we're used to seeing. So we are still shrinking the image onto the lens. The lens is slightly small, or it's slightly longer than the other. It roughly starts somewhere between 15 and 45 millimeters. Now, to be honest, the most common lenses that you will find, if you had to go out and buy a lens, or ask a photographer which ones they use, probably the two biggest ones are 24 millimeter and 35. Now, another one you will see, in fact, the photographer who took this for me, he was using a 16 millimeter lens here. That's why it kind of looks almost, fisheye, but not quite. This one was a 24 millimeter. Now, Maya's cameras, by default, does anybody know what the focal length is for Maya cameras? All the cameras, we're talking about perspective, and the ortho cameras, which are front, side, back, top. They are 35 millimeters. That is a wide-angle lens. Now, it's an average kind of garden variety lens that we have. But just be aware, it is going to create a little bit of distortion.
Can you customize the lens or the cameras on mine to change the focal?
Absolutely. I'm going to show you guys how to do that. Yes, you can. All right, so this lens range usually goes between 15 and 45 millimeters. All right, normal, sounds kind of funny, but normal lenses are the ones that are right in the middle. They don't shrink or magnify the image onto the lens. They are mostly used for portraits. Because a portrait, you don't want to distort your subject. Make sense? The last thing you want to do is elongate or enhance some facial feature that may not be flattering, like a big bulbous nose.
No.
You know, the nose may not be that big, but it's going to be accentuated with a small lens. So, if you are a modeler and you are going to get reference from somebody, ask them if they can give it to you in either a normal lens, like a 50 millimeter is a standard portrait lens. Ask them if they can take it in either 50 millimeter or possibly one of the bigger ones, like a small telephoto. We'll get into what the differences are in a second. All right, but we are not shrinking or magnifying the image. Kind of remains undistorted. Does that make sense so far? So Maya's cameras, whenever you create a brand new camera, by default is 35 millimeters. And you can go into the attributes in Maya and change the focal length, which I will show you guys as soon as we're done going through this. All right, so the last lens type is called a telephoto. It is 65 millimeter to infinity to those big giant, they look like tank barrels that they use in sporting events. They almost look like telescopes, they're so big. All right, we are magnifying the image. We're taking something from a far distance away and magnifying it so we can kind of look at it zoomed in. Now, part of the problem with taking something and magnifying it is, if I take, let's see. All right, so from back here, where I'm standing, there's a little number plate next to the door. Right here. So if I'm all the way back here, I have a hard time seeing what those numbers are, right? I could take a telephoto lens and magnify it and zoom it in. Now, here's the thing though. That's on a wall, that's not too bad. But, let's say I have a stool in between. So I'm still going to set my camera to zoom in on the numbers there. But what's going to happen is, when I zoom in on the numbers, I'm going to have my background, my midground, and my foreground all compressed because I'm zooming it in. So what's going to happen is my chair is going to look like it's right up against the wall because I'm zooming that back wall in. As I zoom the back wall in, the midground comes in and the foreground come in. We get all that lens compression. That means we kind of lose track of the actual distance between the camera and the stool and the wall and the camera and the wall. It's hard to see. So take a look here. We don't know whether these buildings are attached, whether there's an alleyway in between them. There could be a 2-lane highway, could be a 4-lane highway. We just don't know. Same thing with sports photography. All right? We've got nice overlap here in the players, but if you look at their feet, you're really not too sure. How close are they? Like, are they right on top of each other? Are they a couple feet away, a couple yards away? We don't know. Even this guy back here, we can see there's 2 or 3 people between them, but he still looks roughly about the size of the other guy. That is that lens compression. And that's something you have to deal with if you're modeling. You tend to lose sight of, okay, I got something from a telephoto lens. I can make out the foreground pretty well, but I'm not really sure how big the midground is or how far back the background goes. makes it hard to judge depth. So, you have to be aware of all this kind of stuff. Like I said, as a modeler, you want to be able to have your reference shot with the least amount of distortion as possible, because you don't want to model distortion in. You also don't want to lay your scene out to be distorted based on what you think you see. Questions? Does that make sense? All right, so in Maya, you select the camera, go into the camera's attributes, and the third attribute down is called focal length. You can change your focal length for the camera there. You guys are going to get a little bit of practice doing a simple exercise when you're done rendering out our two scenes. You guys are going to get a chance to pick a scene, create your own composition, create your own camera, your own focal length, and be able to play around with it based on reference you find. Like I said, be aware every time you create a brand new camera, it's 35 millimeter, which may or may not work for your reference. But if you're not aware of this, and you're an animator or you're a layout artist, and you're using the same focal length all the time, people are going to start to notice the sameness in your shots. You know, because cinematographers go and they craft out what lens they're going to use, whether they're going to do an establishing shot, do they want something wide and expansive, they might use a wide angle lens. If they've got a close-up, they might be using a portrait lens. You know, if they're trying to magnify something a great distance away, you know, they may start in with something zoomed in, and then they may zoom out to show the expansiveness of the environment. Okay, that's going to be a telephoto. Because you're zoomed in, like, you know, looks like they're a mile away, and then they just pull back, and basically they are making the lens smaller. Bringing it back. All right, does that make sense? Questions? All right, so we have a couple of tools to aid us in creating a composition in mind. You may or may not be aware of these, but resolution gate is probably the key one that we use all the time. Resolution gate simply goes into your render settings and looks at the size that you've got set up for your image to render at. Now, render settings, under the Common tab, we've got them set up for you in the scene, but the size is Common tab, you go down, and you can pick, do I want 720 by 408? It also has some presets. Do I want to do HD 540, HD 720, HD 1080? Do I want to do, you know, 2K, 4K, 6K, 8K? It's got all the Ks. What it does is it goes in, looks at your render settings, looks at the size, pixel width, pixel height, and creates a line, a dark green line, and it will mask out anything outside of that image size that you've got in your render setting. It'll make it 75% gray. You know, makes it a little bit transparent, just enough so you can see stuff there, but just enough to tell you this is the main area that the camera is going to show when it renders. You use resolution gate when you create a render cam, and this will guarantee you that if you render from that camera, this is what you're going to see. It's not going to be whatever the perspective happens to be at. So resolution gate, simple. Turn it on with that little box with the, it's kind of a white box with the dark center in it. Turn that on. We've also got safe action. If you're an animator, you usually put this set of guides in here. This way you keep all your action. Make sure nothing falls outside the frame of the camera. Does that make sense? Safe titling, nobody titles in Maya. I mean, I don't even think anybody did when it was first built. Every titling's always been done in some other package. But if you're doing type or you're doing a logo or something that has to be read, good common sense guidelines are keep it out of the edge of the frame, put it somewhere in your rule of thirds if it's prominent, or the golden mean so you can make sure the eye finds it easily, and you should be okay. All right, questions? Does that make sense for you guys? So you guys are going to get a chance to play around a little bit with it. Let me go back into what we're going to be working on today. All right, so we're going to be focusing on a couple of things. Sampling, for one, because that's going to give us the quality. IPR, interactive photorealistic rendering, that's going to give us quick feedback right away. That's going to tell us that we have the right camera. Am I looking at the right stuff? Is anything missing? If it's not, then I'm going to go ahead and render a full-blown render, not just use IPR. Integrator. Those are the engines that are in RenderMan. That's basically the core of what makes it do what it does when it renders. How it behaves. Is it a single path tracer? Is it a bidirectional path tracer? Is it just doing direct lighting? Is it doing indirect lighting and direct lighting? Is it doing wireframe? Is it doing ambient occlusion? You have all those choices for modules inside RenderMan. Like I said, the main one we're sticking to is path tracing. All right, so here's your reading. Click on that, you sign in through Safari Books Online. Also, I will be, from time to time, putting links in here for RenderMan's help docs online, which are actually really pretty good. You know, I got cute little Pixar characters in them, but they explain stuff. Sometimes their explanations get into rocket science, so if you start to glaze over, try and find a spot that looks more like shore that you feel safe swimming to. And if you're not sure, just ask. Chances are, if it's overly complicated, we don't really need that information at this point. Here's Discord links. There is the Go to Training link if you want to sign up for that. Campus Lecture Archives. Since we've been doing RenderMan, they're up there from the beginning. Before RenderMan, I was archiving everything we taught in Mental Ray. That's a whole different link. We can't even get Mental Ray anymore, so they're pretty much dead. But since November, all the campus lectures are up there. Information changes month to month based on your questions, based on demos, based on what we're focusing on at the time. Playlist. Sometimes we will have lesson-specific short videos in here. I don't remember if we have anything for lesson 1. We might. Yeah, I got a couple here. They're just basic, generic versions of today's lecture. They're not really specific to you. Whereas you go in here, and these are all the campus lectures. Like I said, back to November. All right, so here's some information. This is exactly what I sent you guys in the announcement. The link for installing RenderMan, Algorithmics, Substance Painter. You can download the whole suite they have there. In fact, you will get a free 1-year license. The student version, you'll get Painter, Designer, and this thing called B2B, Bitmap to Bitmap. Download it all. The only thing you really need is Substance Painter, but not until we get to lecture 8 or 9. So there's no real rush or stress to download it right now. But definitely do get it. We're also going to work in Photoshop a little later on too. We're going to be making some seamless textures. That way they'll kind of set you up for what Photoshop does good and what Painter does good. Painter is perfect for 3D painting, as the name implies. Photoshop is an image editing tool. That is its strong point. I know they've put modules in for 3D, they put modules in for animation, It's an image editing tool. It is the best out there, but it tries to be too many things. All right, so basically,
Okay.
you're going to choose two of these 4 images. And I put the focal length down here just so you get an idea of what you're looking at. Like 40 millimeter, a little non-standard, but it is kind of standard. All right, that's the look you get. That's kind of the high end of wide angle. 24 millimeter, that is definitely wide angle. This verges on normal. Telephoto, 110 millimeter. Usually the standard stops are 70, 100, 200, 300 millimeter. If you've got a variable telephoto lens, you can get 110. Depends on what you want. Fisheye, 10 millimeter. You know, some fisheye lenses are 6 millimeters, some are 12. But you still get that distortion. You'll notice here, since it is Maya, it's 3D, we don't get the true barrel distortion that you get with real glass as a lens. We kind of get the elongation, but we don't get the true barrel distortion. Now, we can get that in post-process effects or in high-end parts of the render. But they tend to be expensive. By expensive, I mean they take a while to render. So that might be, while it doesn't actually look authentic, it has the same results. So basically, we give you guys reference images. That's the target of what your image threshold for quality is. Right? They're all going to say reference on them. So you're going to try and match your render to the reference. If you can get it better, perfect. But these renders are mostly designed so they should not take longer than an hour. Yes, I said an hour. For the most part, the first couple, like this one, they should easily be between 10 and 20 minutes, depending on your level of quality. Some of these, there's a little more finer detail in them. This stuff might take a little longer. This could take 40 minutes, 50 minutes to render, depending on your setting. But like I said, you should be able to get easily under an hour. Now, when you first start rendering, you're not going to know what the settings do. You're going to be kind of shooting in the dark. We're going to give you some guidelines for settings to use, but it's still up for you to fine-tuning those settings to get the best quality render for the least amount of time. That's really what the game is. All right, any questions so far? You have your hand up back?
Yeah, both versions of Maya that I keep trying to open keep crashing on me. I'd like to fix that issue.
You might need to, what version of Maya? 17 and 18?
I've been trying to open up 17 and 18. I deleted them, re-downloaded them from Autodesk, and it just keeps crashing on me.
Have you restarted your computer?
I have.
You have.
I can restart it again.
All right. We're gonna have to tackle that in lab.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Another thing I would suggest is there are some hidden files in Maya when you go to install it that it scatters all through your OS because Maya is built on Unix. So all these hidden folders. I have a document from Autodesk that was a while ago, but it still works for 2017. So if you send me a message, I'll send you a link to that Autodesk doc. It'll basically tell you where all the hidden files are. You delete them and then just try a whole fresh install. Sometimes it's one of those files that's corrupted that's just hanging stuff up.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. All right, so you guys will do 2 renders. All right, you'll pick 2 of these. Then when you're done, you're going to do a third render based on your own composition. Your own composition means you're going to go on the internet and look for something you want to try to recreate the look and feel of. Now, the reason I say look and feel is because at this point it's going to look like a block-in or a layout. Because references you find, chances that we have the same geometry in our scene are minimal. So you're going to be looking at just shapes. What do those shapes represent? Do they represent a person? Do they represent an environment? You know, you're going to try and set the framing of the camera up so you mimic the composition and the layout of the objects in there. Now, since this is not a lighting exercise, you're going to be constrained to using one of the 4 scenes that we've got here. You've got to use our lighting. There's another kind of set of handcuffs on you. Now, the thing is, you can be really creative when you have to be. And I'll show you a couple examples of what some students have done in the past, just to give you an idea of what we're going for. And the whole idea is, to be honest, I want you to be able to play around with the camera, with the focal length, laying out a scene and trying to have fun with it. All right, so the lighting does not quite match, as you're going to find out, but the idea is sort of there. We got a fireplace, we've got some furniture, although, you know, you probably would want to have the chair turned around a little bit more, the sofa moved over a little, but the idea is there. Here's one. This is concept art. This is not a photo. These are not real objects. Somebody drew this. But the whole idea is they were trying to get the vanishing point. And they used the kitchen cabinets as buildings. You know, you kind of get the feel, you know, the impression. That's the real idea of what we're after. The look and feel, the impression that this is related to your reference. Does that make sense? All right, so Godfather, one thing I will say is do not distort your reference. Okay, I don't care if it doesn't take up the whole frame at the top. Don't squash it or stretch it. There's nothing worse than distorted reference. All right, so what it should have done was make it actual size, make the reference smaller so it fits in the frame better. I don't care if there's edges on the side that doesn't line up with it. But, you know, kind of gets the feel. There's a fireplace back there, here's a chair. We're missing Michael Corleone, but that's okay. You can't have everything. You could have stuck a lamp on the chair. That might have been fun. All right, here's another one. Don't stretch the reference. I kind of got the idea. They have basically the same angle going on. Here's one. This is a smaller lens. You can tell kind of looks expansive. The one thing I would say here is they need to spread out the furniture a little more. Right? Kind of got the look and feel of the vanishing point in the back of the scene. You know, they were going for the tables or the table and the chairs back there. But, you know, we have sofas in the scene. You could just move the sofas over there. And the idea is you can't model anything, but you can duplicate and move stuff around if you need to with what we have in the scene. Now, if you start off with one scene and you realize this isn't working, go to another scene. You know, use the geometry, use the lighting to your advantage. Okay, we're missing Liam Neeson, but can't have everything. Kind of got the idea. Mass Effect, that's a stretch, but you know, the chair is looking in the same direction.
Yeah, it looks good.
On an alien world. All right, so dining room, not bad. You know, kind of get the idea that's what they're going for. Like I said, you can move stuff around. You can frame the shot however you want. This one, this is a downright fisheye lens. You can tell by the way it's distorted. Now, they got the fisheye lens part here, but we're not going to get that barrel distortion. But still, you get the idea. So, yes, you can have fun with it. So, yes, it's not alien, but it was pretty clever in the layout. You get the idea of it. Makes everybody laugh when they look at it. Yeah.
Wedged in there? What is actually wedged for the bottom?
That is a cushion from the chair.
Oh.
That's a cushion from the chair. This is the kitchen back here, because all the light's being provided by the kitchen, and that is a table. So yeah, you get the idea, right? Have some fun with it. All right, so what do we give you when you guys go and download your stuff, which down here at the very bottom, this is where you download your files to work with. You're going to get a packet when you download it and expand it. It's going to be a folder with 3 subfolders in it. One folder contains your Maya project folder. Are you guys familiar with Maya project? The project folder structure, right? Maya uses that like a mini database, right? If you set your project to a folder with these specified subfolders, Maya knows where to look for stuff and where to put stuff when it's done with it. It knows where to save your scenes, it knows where to grab your source images from, it knows where to put your renders. RenderMan will create its own folder in there, and RenderMan will put all of its stuff inside your project folder, RenderMan folder. That's why it's really important that you just don't double-click on scene files or drag stuff out on your desktop. No bare Maya files on your desktop, no, oh, all my source images are all over the desktop. No, don't do that. Because if you move anything, you break the connection or the link, and then all of a sudden stuff doesn't work. Images or textures turn black, your image outside the window goes away, RenderMan decides it doesn't like it and it stops working or it quits. A lot of bad things happen. So we give you the project folder with the project folder structure. Now, Maya may not be using all of these subfolders, depending on what you're doing in Maya. Are you doing visual effects? Are you doing animation? Are you doing rigging? Are you doing modeling? Are you doing shading and lighting? It's going to use these folders how it needs to. All right, in addition to that, we also give you a Photoshop template. So the Photoshop template contains all 4 reference images for you guys on layers. You just turn the layer off or on of the reference image you want to use. So if you picked the very first one, you're in luck because by default that's going to be shown. Now, if you want to change reference images on the side down here on layers, you just go down under max sample group, and you can see there's choice 1. Just turn them off and on. They pop right in. Now, when you guys get to your own composition, you will copy your reference into here and put it on top. Makes sense? So, as you are rendering, there are some things you're going to want to keep track of. For today's project, you're going to keep track of your samples. The key thing for getting quality is going to be how many max samples did you use? What's the maximum number of samples you said to put in the scene? And then inside the integrator, that's in the, the engine specific part we're using path tracing, you're going to have how are those samples distributed? They're going to be distributed through direct light, this thing called BXDF, that's actually material, and then indirect light. Those are going to be the three things that are going to clean up your noise in your scene. So far, everybody with me? Does that make sense? So max samples, that's how many samples in total, and then how are those samples distributed down here into your scene. Now, you may have a max sample level of 512 samples. Right? You're not going to have all three of these equal 512. You may not need that. You may need to have significantly less. Here's some guidelines. Pixar says that number of light samples and number of VXDF samples, they need to be the same number. So if you choose, for example, to have 15 light samples, you need to have your VXDF samples 15 as well. The two are meant to be together because direct light on a material, they need the same number of samples to work right. Does that make sense? Now, indirect light is the light that is not directly caused by light hitting the surface. Right? So here inside our little light area, direct light. Over here in the corner, indirect light. So, for here, number of light samples, number of material samples, VXDF. Over here, that's your indirect light. And I'll give you a hint, usually your indirect light samples are going to be twice what the other two are. At least. It may be a lot more, it may be less. But if you start off with, say, you're being conservative and you say, okay, I'm going to put in 2 light samples and 2 VXDF samples. Personally, I would start off with 4 for indirect and work my way there. Now, when you guys hit the render button, first thing that's going to happen is the areas that are direct light are going to clean up really fast. All the grunt work is going to be all the indirect light areas and the shadowy areas. Because it's easy to calculate a light when it hits a surface, and that's all you have to worry about. It's what happens once that light bounces off the surface. Where does it go? Then you got to keep track of that. And your render time. Yes?
How do we determine these samples in our image?
We're going to give you some guidelines. Like I said, in a second, I'm going to kind of go over what RenderMan prefers. But right now, we're just talking high-level theory. X is the number. So. Or pound sign, whatever you want to look at. Hashtag. All right, so you are going to keep track of the render time. We want you guys to make the connection that quality also has a correlation to time. Higher the quality, what do you think is going to happen to time? Yep, it's going to go up. Quality, time, they're going to be kind of tied together. All right, so your renders are going to go down here in the bottom. Now, this watermark you guys are going to change to be your last name, your first name, and the course month, which is 1803. One thing you want to check is that this layer right here is at 15% opacity. This is for every single thing you turn into it. Why is it not at 15%? Because we want you to follow directions. That's basically what it is. So, under watermarks, if you expand it, there's your project name. So I can come in here, I can highlight it. I can spell my own name. All right, so up here, opacity, dial it down to 15%, either with the slider, or if you're lazy like I am, you just type in 15. Right, so all of our templates are varying degrees of opacity. I'll just warn you right now. Don't rely on it being 15%. All right, questions about the template? All right, I'm going to quit out of Photoshop because I'm going to open Maya, and the two do not play well together. All right, the only other thing that we have here for you guys are reference images. These are your targets. The nice thing is you can load these into the RenderMan image tool and be able to look at your render and then flip back and look at the reference. You can go back and forth. You can say, so when you come up and say, how does my render look? We're going to go, what's it look like next to the reference? Go back and forth. If you can't take your eye off of something, chances are neither can we. Like if you're wondering if it's good enough, if you're looking at it, does your eye like zoom in on one spot and go, hope nobody sees that? Well, chances are they're going to see it. So we have reference for each one. That all comes in your little package here. Right, so here's the grading rubric. The first two compositions, they're going to be worth the lion's share. Your composition, it's not weighted that heavily. It's more meant for you to experiment with without the fear of disaster. You know, it's a chance for you to explore. You know, quality is going to be a big issue. Composition, not necessarily 50% on your composition. It is going to weigh a little bit, but to be honest, we're more interested in the look and feel versus nailing it exactly, and also the quality. All right, turning procedures. Here's a checklist of stuff you need to be aware of. The renders you're going to be doing today are going to be small, so they don't take up much time. Right? Like I said, some of them may take close to an hour. If we were doing this in full HD, that would be 4 times larger than the ones we're working on. So that would, you don't need to do 4-hour renders. Your little laptops will. Right, so deliverables, how it's delivered, everything's going to be in a folder named appropriately with all your files. So, you are going to have 3 Maya files. When you get done working on your Maya scene, you're going to save it with your final settings in it and submit that with your template that you created. Oh, one thing I did not mention was when you open your Photoshop template, you're going to save it out as a Targa, not as a PSD. Targa format is our preferred format for delivery. Why Targa? Because it's mostly lossless. JPEGs are compressed, they're lossy. PNGs, they're compressed, they're good, but they're still lossy. TIFFs are good, but they can be really big in file size, and depending on the compression you use, they can be lossy also. And every once in a while with a TIFF, you have aspect ratio issues where if the pixel's not completely square, your image looks squeezed. You have to fix that in Photoshop, it's annoying. So Targa, it's a good format. Now, MA versus MB. If we ask for MA, give us MB. Nah, you're not paying attention. If you're having trouble delivering it in a format, let us know. Chances are most of the stuff we want is MA, but once in a while we'll ask for an MB file. All right, questions about this so far?
What's the difference between an MA and MD?
Good question. Anybody know the answer before I answer? What is the difference between a Maya MA file, ASCII, or a Maya MB file, binary?
Format.
Yeah, the format, but what is the difference between the two? Yes?
My binary, doesn't it get saved as just a bunch of zeros and ones?
Yes,
Like
it
in
does.
code?
Yes, it does. Zeros and ones. If you are a Bender from Futurama and you can do 1000, 1010, there's your binary. It cuts out spaces, it cuts out punctuation. It doesn't have to worry about anything. It just puts data down as either ones or zeros. And it translates all those ones and zeros into something. ASCII looks like human language. We can understand that. It's code. Now, the one advantage over the other, if you need to edit the file for any reason, say you want to go in there and you want to remove the fact that you built it with Maya 2018, so somebody in 2017 or 2016 or 15 could use it, you can go in and change it. If you know what you're doing, you can do stuff in it. If you don't, you can create a disaster and kill a scene. But it's editable. That's the bottom line. And if you're interested in code, it's a good way to go in and look at what's being done.
Thank you.
Consequently, also, you're welcome. Consequently, ASCII files are slightly larger because they have spaces, they have punctuation, they have areas where there's nothing. Whereas binary, everything is crammed together to save space. So binary files are a little smaller. Good question. I'm glad you asked that. Anybody else? All right, let's go in and take a look at Maya. Now, for your viewing pleasure, I will be demoing in 2018 until it crashes. And then I'll switch over to 17. See, isn't that cute? 28.2. All right, it takes just as long to load as 2017. Gotta wait for Arnold to load, then RenderMan will pop in. At this point, you might think you can get started, but don't be fooled. Don't be lulled into a false sense of security. Maya will hit you in the back of the head when you're not looking. So just wait patiently. Now, if you do not have RenderMan loaded, you have to at least wait for Arnold to load. Does that make sense? Now, how do you know you have RenderMan loaded? Well, you wait for Arnold. There we go. Arnold's done. RenderMan's done. So once you at least have Arnold loaded, to find out if you have Mental Ray loaded and you downloaded the right version and it's going to work, we go into the plugin manager. How do I get to the plugin manager? Windows, settings and preferences, plugin manager down there at the bottom. Very good. Now, all the common Maya stuff is going to be at the top. Maya is built in many different modules. Right? There's a rendering module, a modeling module, an animation module, a visual effects module, there's a simulation module. There's a module for pretty much everything. You can turn parts off and on, exporters, importers. Right, down here, once you get past the big list, this is where you get into the secondary Maya stuff, like bifill. You get past that, then you get into the plugins. Right, so mine happens to be about 3 or 4 plugins from the main section. And it's going to say Applications Pixar RenderMan for Maya. Right, it's got the version number, it's got what it's for. Yours will probably say 2017. What you want to do is click Apply to All, Loaded, and Auto Load. This way it will load Maya, or will load RenderMan for you now, and theoretically load for you when you quit out of Maya again automatically. Now, when you click on this, the first time it's going to ask you, do you want RenderMan to be your default renderer? The answer is yes, definitely. You do. If not, it will keep trying to force Arnold on you. And Arnold's an okay renderer. Does anybody know where Arnold came from? Didn't come from under a rock. Third party. Guess what? Autodesk bought them. It was a company called Solid Angle. They built a rendering engine called Arnold that worked really well when Maya decided it, or I should say when Autodesk decided it did not want Maya to pursue its own software. As soon as their agreement with Mental Ray died, they wanted to go find somebody else. So rather than having a third party come in, like Mental Ray was always its own company until NVIDIA bought them out, Rather than have that, they just went out and plunked cash down on the table and bought it. And kind of rammed it into Maya. It's a good renderer. It really is. The reason we're not using it is because it's, when Maya incorporated, they kind of stripped out some of its functionality to make it fit in the interface, so it's not quite ready for prime time yet. And besides, people use RenderMan a lot more than they use Arnold. And that's kind of why we went down that path. So, I digress. Right, so you have it loaded. Now you want to make sure that it is loaded currently to be your renderer, because if it's not loaded to be your renderer, you may run into some issues. How do you figure that out? Go into the render settings. The render settings is this kind of Hollywood clapper with a gear on it. Little tiny gear here. You click on that, that will bring up your render settings window. Render settings are for any renderer. So render using, that will tell me all of the renderers that I have available to use in Maya. Like I've enabled the Maya vector renderer, so it's there. Maya software is there. Maya hardware is there. Arnold is there, and so is RenderMan. You want to make sure RenderMan is your renderer of choice. Now, the most common area, once you make RenderMan your renderer of choice, we're going to be spending most of our time in the sampling area. The top part of the sampling tab in the render settings, these are your production quality settings. Right, so what do they do? Well, let's just take kind of a brief overview. Right, so sampling's at the very top, that's production. There is a separate section under sampling called IPR, which means IPR can have its own set of sample numbers. For IPR, since it's quick, fast, interactive feedback, we keep our max samples down. The default is 64. To be honest, I turned mine down to 32. All I want is down and dirty. Does it look right? Is it the right camera? Is my lighting in there? Is all the stuff I need in there? That's all you need to change. When you hit IPR to render, it pulls from that, let's call it a well. Now, when you do a production render, using render current frame button, it pulls from the sampling well at the top, which contains more information. All right, underneath IPR, the integrators, we're using path tracing. The max path length of 10 means that you will have 1 path for direct light and 9 for indirect light calculation. It's going to trace the path of a ray for whatever that value equals, 9 times. Yes?
So when I open up render settings, it only gives me render layer and render using. How it would get all the settings, how it shows.
Do you have render using RenderMan?
Yes.
And you should have the tabs going across the top underneath.
Yeah, that's not showing up.
You should have seen. Then RenderMan's probably not fully installed or there's an issue.
Okay, sounds good.
You might want to restart Maya and restart
This
to see if RenderMan pops in.
Okay.
This
Now, here's something else that happens. I'm glad you brought that up. If Maya has not fully loaded and you try to open up the render settings, a lot of times you'll open it up and your render settings will be completely blank.
Right.
There'll be nothing in there. That usually means it didn't have time to load before you do that. Even if you close it and open it again, it's still wigged out. So just try putting out of Maya, open it again, make sure everything's loaded, and then open up render settings.
Okay.
That usually works. Okay. So, max path length. When we get into reflective objects, common objects like, this tabletop, your computer, cell phones, copper, brass, zinc, glass, concrete, wood, generic materials. We want light to bounce around a lot. So our max path length will be at 10 at least. When we're doing just beginning lighting, you're going to notice that all of our scenes are going to be gray. You're going to be living in a gray beige world. Why? Because we will not be distracted by shiny objects. To be honest, the first thing your eye goes to is color and texture, right? And then we lose focus of light. So we basically work in passes. We do our lighting with flat gray, or we call it diffuse. It's a diffuse material. We do it with flat gray, then we add materials, then we add textures. Make sense? So that's why everything is flat gray. Nail that first. When we start building on that, it'll make a lot of sense. You're not distracted. Now, having said that, for today, you can take your max path length down to 2, which means 1 ray, or 1 is for direct light and 2 is for indirect light. Maybe 3. Nothing bad will happen if you leave it at 10, but it may take a little longer to render and you're not going to see any benefits for it because there are no shiny surfaces. So to shave off just a few seconds, we gotta squeeze everything we can out of this. Like I said, it's not mandatory, but it will help just a little. You just have to remember to turn it back to 10, because when we do glass, you're gonna, why is my glass black? Well, because it stopped after the second bounce. It can't go through your glass surface to say, hey, I'm transparent. All right, so we always keep sample mode in BXDF. That's basically material mode. Yes?
What would happen if we went over 10 for these?
Nothing bad. It's just going to take a little longer to render. Because now you're saying it's got to keep track of more indirect illumination out there. Now, we've done some tests where we've cranked it up to like 20, 30, 40. Didn't really notice any difference at all other than maybe a slightly longer render time. But that is really, and what'll happen is if your materials don't require that, they're not going to care. Now, if you've got, say for example, you've got glass in front of 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 glass, and you need to be able to see all the way through that, then you may need to be way up above 10. But if you've got standard couple of glasses in front of each other, 10 is fine. And you're going to see we're going to calculate surfaces to know how much we need. The default numbers actually that they give you are actually pretty good for most common usages. But like I said, if you want to really tweak it down, today we're not worrying about transparency, we're not worrying about shiny objects. We can take down that max path length just a little. Now, here are your subsettings under here. So right now, by default, the number of light samples, the number of BXDF samples, and the number of indirect samples are all in 1. Those are base bottom numbers. Like I said, Pixar recommends that these two numbers be the same. So if you raise one up to 5, raise the other one too. Because you want direct light and material to respond the same way. Down here under indirect, that's going to be areas that are going to require more samples. Because that's not direct light, it's harder to solve when it's just bounced, like in the corner here. All right, this corner is a result of all the light in the room bouncing around and eventually making its way to the corner. That's expensive. In the real world, our computer is pretty good. We can keep up with it for the most part. But in our virtual world, most computers don't have the power to do that. By our computer, I mean Earth. So, first line of defense is going to be how many max samples do I have plugged in? The default they give you is 128. To be honest, you're going to be going higher than 128. How high do we go? Well, here's the thing. Pixar loves the power of 2. Most computers love the power of 2. All binary information, all coding stuff is all reliant on 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 24, and so on. You see what I'm getting at? Power of 2. Computers have those functions built in automatically. It's easy for them to be able to make a leap from one set to another, rather than going, well, I need 63.5 samples. What is 63.5? What does half a sample look like? Why 63? You may as well go to 64, where the computer can go, here's a chunk, boom, there's 64. Rather than taking 64 and tearing off a little piece and going, okay, there's your 63. It's got these chunks in its memory already. So we recommend you keep your max samples to the power of 2. The computer will be a lot more efficient. RenderMan's built for that. So if you want to go up from 128, go up to 256. If you want to go up to 256, go to 512. To be honest, you're probably going to start at 256 and work your way up. If you go above 2048, we need to rethink how you're distributing all those samples. Does that make sense? Now, I talked about just now maximum samples, minimum samples. Minimum samples by default are going to be 0. You think 0, well, there's no samples for areas that don't have a lot of contrast in them, or what's going on with 0? Is the renderer doesn't deem it worthy to even look at it? No, it just means that if you leave it at 0, it will use the square root of your max samples. Now, if you're not sure what the square root is, you can get that in your calculators using the scientific function. There's a little square root thing in there. You plug a number in, hit square root, it will give you what the square root is. So for example, the default RenderMan settings of 0 min samples and 128 max samples gives you minimum sampling at 11.3137. That's a weird number, I'm sorry. I like numbers, but that's just a weird number. If I were a computer, I'd be going, what? Why can't you be like 8 or 16 or something I recognize? Now, if you go up to 256 max samples, square root of 256 is 16. That's a number the computer likes. Same thing, if you go up to 512, your min samples are going to be 22.6274, some number. Right? If you go up to 1024, then your minimum samples are going to be 32. 32 is the square root of 1024. Yeah.
If you do use one of those in between max samples, can you put in minimum sample as one of those nice numbers to fix that?
Perfect. Yes, you can. And that was going to be my very next statement. Glad you asked that. Thank you. So, what I would say is, if you want to use 128, go up to 16 for your min samples. Don't let it do 11 point some change. All right, if you're going to do 512, go up to 32. I would recommend not going down because it's always better to have some more samples than not enough. What happens is you'll reach an area, if you decide to use a smaller number, it'll reach an area and it'll go, you know what, I got the minimum number of samples here, that's all that pixel needs, I'm done after 22. It's always better to go up to 32 and have a couple extra samples for that area just to make sure it's going to resolve and look nice with all the pixels around it. So, max samples, keep it to the power of 2. Min samples, think square root. You know, think either 8, 16, 32, 64 if you've got a really big number and you want to start. Just remember that you are starting at ground level with every pixel getting 64 samples. That's not, doesn't sound like a lot, but when you've got a huge bucket of over 2,000 samples and an image that's 4K, that can be pretty expensive. Fortunately, our images are teeny tiny compared to a 4K image. All right, does that make sense to you guys? Question?
Yeah. So when you're saying like samples, is that how many times the renderer is looking at a specific area?
Yes. A specific, think of it as looking at a pixel. So for example, if this is my pixel, and I've got my min samples set to 16, it's going to start the whole image with each pixel is going to get 16 samples. Then it's going to take the bucket of samples and dump it again and start looking at comparing. Okay, previously this is what this looked like. If I sample this again, is it going to look better? If it looks better, it's going to keep that number of samples and go on to the next bucket that it dumps on. So the sampler or the renderer is going to keep dumping these buckets of samples until it's distributed all of your maximum number. And it's going to do it in waves and passes. You're going to see your scene like redraw from the center out. And it's just going to keep doing that. And each pass, it's going to be getting better. Each pass, it's going to be dumping samples. Each pass, it's going to be looking at the previous render and the current one and going, all right, if the pixel doesn't change, I might call it done. Or I might say, all right, I might do another pass on it to see if it does change the third time I render it. Once it reaches a threshold of it's not changing between X number of passes, then it's going to call it done or converge, and it's going to stop paying attention to that pixel. Make sense? Good question. All right, any other? All right, so max samples, we kind of went through this. Pixel variance. This is where one pass or a pixel is compared with the same pixel in another pass. Has it changed? Does it vary? If it varies with a pass, it's going to keep being sampled. If after a number of times it decides, it's kind of like a threshold control. The higher the number, the less threshold it has. That means it's going to solve that pixel sooner. The smaller the number, the more samples it's going to dump on it. And it's going to keep dumping samples on until it reaches a point where it goes, okay, that pixel hasn't changed, I'm going to stop on that pixel. That's pixel variance. Now, we're always going to have adaptive sampling turned on. Okay, because if we take this pixel variance to 0, we're going to make every pixel get sampled the maximum number of times. That's expensive. I'll be right up front with you. That's real expensive. That's why we keep our min samples, you know, at a square root or a close square root to it. And we keep pixel variance, the default is 0.01. If you make the number smaller, it samples more. If you make the number higher, it's going to sample a little less. You're varying the threshold of it, calling a pixel finished or not. Basically, we start with the default. And after you do a render, you say, okay, at 128, I still got a lot of noise. I know I can do better, so I bump it up to 256. I render it again. How's it look? It's still noisy. It got a little better. I put it at 512. Okay, it's better, but you know it's still not done. So maybe I bump it up to 1024. I render it. It's still noisy in the same area. So, well, I could bump it up to 2048. Bump it up to 2048. I change my minimum sample number to be 64 or some other square root number that's close. I still get noise in the same spot, then I have to think, all right, I got a lot of samples in here, it's cleaning up everything except this one area. Is that one area a shadowed area, a dark area, or do I need to adjust my pixel variance? Is the whole area a problem, or is a small piece of it a problem? Right, so dark fall off, dark areas, adjusting this number will help with those in-between shadowy areas. Areas between the light and the dark. Those kind of nether gray gradient regions. Now, the higher the number will speed up your render, but it's got a higher threshold for noise in those dark areas. Just be careful when adjusting this stuff because you can make your render increase a lot. To be honest, I would say pixel variance, I would adjust it and I would go, if I wanted to make it have a higher threshold for calling a pixel done or not, I might go down to 0.005. For dark fall off, I might go down to 0.020. Maybe 0.015. I would do incremental numbers like that. I would not try to go 0.0251. Keep it within the first 3 decimals. Just remember, making the number smaller is going to increase your render time. Start with the defaults though. Try to work within the defaults that they have before you start adjusting these two. Before you adjust these two, you should be down here adjusting these. Because to be honest, once you get a big number up here set, then you start increasing this. This will start helping you as well. Remember, they're telling you exactly what the samples are. Direct light, material light, indirect light. If your noise is in a shadowy area, that's indirect light. You should be cranking this up to try and get rid of it. Now, Pixar has a couple of tools that you can use. You don't have to render the entire scene. We can render out small parts of it and focus in on it. All right, so let me give you a quick tour of that. All right, so I'm going to use default numbers that are, well, let me open the scene up. First off, set your project, right? File, set project. Find the scene that you just downloaded, put it into a folder, shading and lighting, or put it somewhere where you can organize your stuff. All right, so here is my project folder structure. I want to go inside here. Now, I'm going to open that folder up just to make sure this is my proper folder structure. Do not select any subfolders and just hit set. Now, you're ready to go. When you go File Open, or click the little open icon, it will take you right into your scenes folder. Automatically, of the scene that you want. All right, so somebody pick one.
3.
There is no 3. It's 2, 4, 5, 6.
Of course there's no.
Of course there's no 3.
I thought it would.
Yes. 2. All right, let's go 2. All right, I'm not going to save. I'm going to open it up. It's going to, you may get this error message because we were originally using these scenes for render or for mental ray, and in spite of our best efforts, there's some hidden mental ray node somewhere, and I can't get rid of it. I have to go into the actual scene file in the ASCII and look at it and see if I can find it. But the trouble is, it's scattered throughout whole, 2,000 lines of code for the scene. So just click OK. Just click OK. It'll go away. All right. It opens up into the render cam for you. If you guys want to change render cam, or you want to go in and look at the perspective, just go to Panels, Perspective, go to the Perspective camera. Kind of navigate around. If you want to look at it in shaded mode, hit 5. It does take a little longer to respond. All right, we're going to get into what all this stuff is in here. Things look like spiders on the wall. We'll get into them. They're called portal lights. We'll get into them when we start environment lighting. All right, that right there is your sun. Those are portal lights. Portal lights work off of this thing called a dome light, all to create light. All right, so here's our environment. Now, each environment has been stripped out to be optimized. Because to be honest, this was one big giant scene. We had four rooms full of props. The trouble is, when you're dealing with global illumination, it calculates stuff that's not even seen to the camera. Because it has to be realistic. So we stripped it all out and made each scene file its own camera shot. That way it's optimized for the camera and for rendering. Literally, we shaved off like 40 minutes of scene when we rendered. So, that's why when you guys go to decide whether you want to use this scene or one of the others for your composition to move stuff around, you have to decide which one's going to work for you. It's not the case of one size fits all. So, when you open up the scene, I like to work in my render cam anyway, right there. So the camera is locked, you can't move it in the render cam, which is good. So, first thing you want to do is make sure RenderMan is your renderer of choice. I'm going to open up my render settings. Okay, good news. RenderMan is set. Now I'm going to go under sampling. Right, here's my default settings. Right here, this is production. Here's my IPR. That's my interactive photorealistic renderer. It will probably render. I like to knock it down to 32 because this is not meant for final quality. You don't have all the settings here that you have up here. Here's my integrator. To be honest, I'm only working with grayscale. There's no reflectivity involved as far as shiny objects, light bouncing around a whole lot. I like to drop that down to 2. That'll shave off a couple of minutes when I render. Now, for a quick render, I'm going to use what's called IPR. IPR is the second button on the left of the RenderMan shelf. It's got a little arrow in the bottom right corner, which means if you right-click, you can choose which camera you want to render from. Just because I'm in the render cam here, RenderMan is not going to render from that camera. It's going to render from wherever it feels like, which is usually perspective. So for example, if I do not choose the render cam and just click the button, what it's going to do is launch the image tool and it's going to start rendering. So it looks like it actually rendered from the render cam. Made a liar out of it, of course. All right, so this is how RenderMan works. It does passes. So right now we're probably about 8 or 9 sample levels in. Incrementally, it's just going to dump bucket after bucket of samples. I can stop this at any point. A couple ways I can stop it. In the image tool, which is this window right here, I can hit escape. If it's rendering, let me re-render that again. So I can compare. On the left side, by default, you should have this catalog window. And I can go back and look at my previous render. Now, if I want to stop this render that's currently running, I could hit escape or I could right-click on IPR and stop IPR render. If you accidentally miss a left-click, it's going to render again. All right, a couple quick things about the image tool while I'm in here. All right, catalog on the left, which shows you all the renders you've done, And on the right, inspector. Those two windows are not mandatory, but I love having them. I like to be able to see different versions of a render, and I like to be able to see what settings I used when I rendered. So notice it tells me minimum number of samples, maximum number of samples. Here's my pixel variance. Here's my path tracer mode. So I got one BXDF sample, one BSDF sample, one direct light. So it's basically going to be indirect, direct light, and BXDF. And then the render time. That's how you can figure out how long did it take me to render. I only let it go for 21 seconds. The last time I let go for 43. Notice the areas right here where there's direct light, nice bright light, that's pretty clean right away. Not very grainy. All the other areas, more indirect light, it's going to take longer for that to render because it's going to have to keep sampling and sampling until it converges all the information. Now, at any point, if you accidentally hide the catalog or the inspector, a couple ways you can get it back. One is go up to the image tool window, or I'm sorry, the image tool menu set, and you can go down to Windows. So there's your catalog, there's your inspector. The shortcut keys, fortunately, are C for catalog. So if I hit C, it will disappear. If I hit C again, it will reappear. Or not. Oh, looks like, yeah, there we go, thank you. Stop. Okay. Go back that way. So, inspector, same thing. I and C. That will hide and show your inspector. So far, so good. Right now, we are looking at preview quality only. So, if I want to render, so for example, I know in the direct light areas here, that looks pretty good. I really don't have to render that part. I want to render an area that I think it's going to take a while to clean up. And so far, in very coarse mode, I can see area like right here, or maybe in the fire. So if I want to specialize or just zoom in on that one area, what I can do is use what's called the crop tool. Again, it looks like a clapper. I can take the crop tool, and I can then left click and drag, and it will place a box. And I can render inside that box. Now, when I render inside that box, a couple things are going to happen. One is, the shortcut for that is R. But what it's going to do is not use IPR samples. It's going to use production samples. It's going to do final quality. So in that area, I can just hit R. Everything else will disappear, but it will just render that little box. Now, here's the thing. Look what happened. Wait, I was here in RenderCam, but now it's not. Why? One thing you want to make sure is just go in and make sure you are in the render camera, make sure you've done an IPR, and then try doing that crop area. Alright, that looks pretty good. Let me escape. Let me try R again. So, what do I do in this situation besides drop the F-bomb on Maya? I close and I quit out of Maya and reopen it again. Something got stuck. RenderMan does that once in a while, and it's usually when I demo. That's why don't get 2018 yet. so that's good. I'll restart Maya, I'll restart RenderMan. Alright, Arnold loaded, RenderMan loaded. Life should be good. I'm still going to set my project because I don't believe that Maya will fix it for me. It's set. I'm going to open up my second exercise. Fortunately, I didn't make any changes. I didn't lose any information. If I had, adjusted some settings, I would save a version of the scene out and open the version I was working on. But we're just getting started. So let's check render settings. There we go. Everything is the same. The only thing I did was turn the integrator down a little bit just to save a little bit of render time. I put my IPR samples at 32, and you know what? I'm going to save that. So I'm going to call this 1803. This way I know I've got some work done on it. There we go. Continue. Life is good. So I'm going to do a quick IPR just to get lay of the land. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to choose my camera, which in this case is camera 02, AA contrast. It's the weird name we had for it. All right, so far so good. Let me hit escape. I'm going to use the crop tool again. Crop in on that area. Then I'm going to hit the R key, and that will render theoretically from the same camera. There we go. So now you might say to yourself, okay, well that's fine, but I would like to keep the old part of my image in the background while I'm working on that small swatch, so I can get an idea of what it's going to look like in the whole. So what I can do is I can use this image as a background. So I can select this image and go up to toggle background. Now when I go back and look at my area that I'm rendering, now I've got it. I've got my little cropped area in the background of my first render. Did everybody see that? That make sense? So you can see huge difference. That was 128 samples. Didn't really clean up all the noise. Now here's something else to keep in mind. When you're rendering, if you zoom in on an image like this, oh, to pan around in here, you have to hold the command key and left click if you zoom in. So if I zoom in, which I'm just using my mouse wheel, I am zooming in on a fixed image, right? I'm only making my pixels get bigger. So you are going to see aliasing. Always look at it at 100%. Now, if you're not sure what 100% is or how to get back to it, go up to the Pixar View menu, or you can right-click in the Image tool and go to View that way. What you want to do is reset Zoom Pan, right-click again, and make the image, or make the window resize to the image. Now, if you do that while you're using the crop tool, guess what? It wants you to resize to that. So you have to watch what tool you're using. Now, to get rid of the crop or move it around, all you have to do is simply grab an end, move it around, Or if you want to delete the whole thing, you can simply hit delete and redraw it again. So in order to draw another one, you can't have more than one, unfortunately. You have to decide which one goes. Right, so key to rendering is render out small pieces of it, find the area that looks the noisiest, work on that. So that was 128 samples. I know that is definitely not enough. So I'm going to bump up to the next level, 256. All right, based on my little chart that I had before, I'll get to you. I saw your hand up. I'll get to you in a second. I want to use the power of 2. Let's go back up here. So 256, so 16, not bad. I can set that manually. Or if I leave it at 0, it's automatically going to use 16. So if I hit R again, it's going to render inside that same area. And this time it's going to use 256 samples. Yes?
How do you click that if it makes the background again?
You have to select, in the catalog, you have to select the render that's got the whole background. And then you go over to the icon that says toggle background. It kind of looks like a little landscape, a mountainscape with a sun in it. You have to click that button. For example, see in my catalog, I've got next to IPR, it's blue. That means that I've toggled the background on. That's going to be my background. You're welcome. So rendering out small areas is a good way to figure out whether this is going to work or not before I commit to a long-term relationship and render the entire scene. Yes?
Is there a way to pause a render just in case you have to move your location?
No. You have to stop it, unfortunately. If you can pause a render in what's called batch rendering, but it's only going to pick up right where it was. If you change a location, it's not going to register. Just because that information has already been dumped into the renderer. Yes?
I selected crop rectangle and I hit R, but it just stays the same. It doesn't change everything. It's just that rectangle.
You'll have to show me after class. Take a look at it. All right, so I can see it's better than my previous render, right? That was 128. This is 256. Probably even on the crappy projector, you can see that. Definitely not enough samples. I think I can do better. So I would probably crank that up to 512. And then I would probably bump this up to 32. Just to stay with the power of 2. Right? Because at 512, I don't want to be doing 22.62 minimum samples. I'll just go right to 32. So now at 512, I'll hit render again, and it's going to use that larger number. Now, when I'm all done, and I say, okay, you know what, that looks pretty good, I'm ready to commit. Then I'm going to use the button on the left. That button on the left will render current frame. That means it will use production quality settings and render your entire image. Now, I have not even begun to add any direct light samples, material light samples, or indirect samples. Once I get a feel for whether 512 is enough samples or not, I'll be able to tell by the overall look will be a lot better. But there still may be a little grain in it. Then I'm going to start bumping up the direct light material samples together and then indirect. The reason I chose this area because this is all indirect lighting. like I said, that sofa area right around here, that'll clean up pretty quick. In fact, if I let that go a few more times, that'll be completely white inside there. Alright, so it's still a bit grainy, not too bad. Yeah, I might bump up to 1024 before I start adding. Actually, you know what? Let's try this. Let me go back to 512. And let me bump this up a little bit down here. So number of light samples, let's try 2. I'll try 2 for my BXDF. I want to keep those two numbers the same. And here, I like to go to 4. Now what I'm going to do is hit R again, let it render and compare the two. No, just think back. I should have understanding when rendering, or not swearing when rendering. Right, so this will save you a lot of time. The worst thing you can do is render the entire scene, only to find out, crap, it's still noisy. Render the whole thing again, take small areas. It's worth letting IPR finish its bare minimum number, like 32, or if you want to keep it in the default of 64. You have a question?
So when you're rendering a cropped area,
Yes.
it's like doing the full.
It's full production
It's not
quality.
an IPR.
Right. Yeah, and you can tell, it'll tell you right here in the inspector. It's using 32, 512, and now under BXDF, light, and indirect, it's got 224. It's telling me everything that I have. That's kind of why I like to use the inspector, because it's reminding me exactly what I'm doing. And every time I click on a previous version, like up here, it's telling me, okay, I've only got one of those. Yes?
Why is it that when I render smaller areas, the noise in the area I'm already in?
The noise in the area, what's that?
The noise in the area I've already rendered when I render in the area.
Oh, because it's going to stay where it was with your initial background image.
So do I need to like anything?
No, you can't. You're only rendering. See, that's part of the downside is it only keeps one background image and only shows you an updated area in your new cropped area. Like it would as soon as you hit R again, it's going to go back and display the original background image and then your new cropped area. It's not going to keep all your other little cropped areas. You have to kind of go through them in the catalog. You have to manually click them to see them. Yeah, I wish it did keep it, but it doesn't. Yes.
So doing this is basically to see what value you do need for the full production.
Correct. Yeah, this is a way for you to test out a small area to see, is that enough? Is that too much? Is it going to work? If it's not, play around with the areas till you get it to work. Chances are, if you can clean it up in one area, go to another one, pick another area that you think might be noisy. Like another shadowy area I like to go to is inside the fireplace. If I get that area to look good and I go in the fireplace and render it out, if they look the same, then I'll hit the render button and render the whole thing. Because chances are the rest of the scene is going to look good. Now, off chance I missed, maybe there's another corner that may have been a little noisier, but at least this way you've sampled areas that you think are going to give you a problem just based on a quick IPR. And you can usually tell those areas, like I said, this is really coarse and grainy, but I can tell in here, there's not much grain. There's a little bit, but not much. There's not really a whole lot of grain here. It's the darker areas where there's shadow and more indirect light where the clumps of grain look. It's kind of like throwing wet sand as opposed to dry sand. You know what I mean? It's going to be clumped together. All right, so how did that compare? One second. How did that compare with my my previous render. There we go. All right, so believe it or not, it's probably hard to see in the screen here, but a lot of noise here. As soon as I added some indirect samples, that cleaned up quite a bit of noise. I don't know if you guys can see that on the projector. Yeah, but it looks much better. So what I might consider doing instead of dumping more max samples in, that tells me maybe I'll need to force some more samples into, maybe I'll crank up my direct light and VXDF to 4 and maybe my indirect to 8, render that area out, see if it cleans it up even more. Yes?
With the light on the couch, is there a way to soften those edges with the harshness of the light, or is it just part of the?
Yeah, that's part of the way it's lit. That's roughly the intensity of real light on a flat surface without texture on it. When we get into adding materials, that's going to change. But in reality, if you had direct sunlight, say in the morning, coming in on a surface, if say your couch were white, it would be blown out anyway. If you took a picture of it, it would be like super white. You wouldn't be able to see any detail. So that's why, I mean, there are some studios that do not like blown out stuff, but in reality, when we take pictures, that's kind of how stuff looks.
I always like to soften the edges of things.
Yeah, well, that also has to do with the type of light. So remember, a small light, hard light, gives us hard shadows. The sun is considered a hard light because it is, 5 centimeters in our sky, but it's also millions of miles away and it's millions of times bigger than here. We'll get into that next time, actually. So fortunately, the nice thing about RenderMan is that it will soften your shadows based on the type of light you're using. It has a formula for using the sunlight, the angle of the sunlight. Like if it's straight up and down, you're going to have rock hard shadows. If it's more towards sunrise, sunset, shadows are going to be longer. They're also going to soften more automatically. Yep. Good question. Yes.
Just real quick, how did you resize the picture again whenever you?
Well, when I accidentally moved it, I used the wheel. If I want to reset it to be the original size, I just right-click, go to View, and to Reset Pan Zoom. That'll bring it back to 100%. Now, one last thing you're going to want to know is, all right, I did a render. How do I save it out? So, in the image tool, we go File, Export File. Automatically, it is going to be the file type of OpenEXR-HAF. That's exactly what you want. You're just going to give it a name, put it into a folder. You could use the images folder inside your project folder. You could put it in a RenderMan folder that's inside your project folder. Put it somewhere where you can find it. Keep it in the folder structure. That way it travels around with you if you put it on a flash drive and go to another computer. Now, once you're done with that EXR you can open in Photoshop. In fact, you'll open the template first, then open your EXR, and then copy the EXR and paste it into the template. And move it around and position it in the right spot. And then when you're all done, all those different file formats, Photoshop will let you save it as a target, which is a nice small file size, fairly lossless as far as compression goes. All right, questions? You guys got a good idea on what you're going to be doing today? So it is going to be some experimentation. And again, here's something else you should know how to do, is load the reference in. That would be nice. So I've got a target. How do I get the target in? Well, in the image tool, go File, Open File. And let's go to my folder, which is here. There we go. Here's my reference images. Here's image number 2. So there's my reference, and then I can see, well, how well does my image show up? Oh, not bad. Except, see, all these little smudgy spots here, that's built on my screen. My screen looks like yours. Some of you may have cleaner screens. But, yes, I've done this, and I'll be honest, I've had filth on my screen, and I've been re-rendering with higher samples, and then I go, oh. So, wipe your screen once in a while. Save yourself the embarrassment of cleaning up something that was part of one. All right, so there's the reference. You can compare. That's the beauty of it. And when you go to re-render, that reference is going to stay there till you close out of the image tool, and it'll dump all the information. So, how many renders can you keep in the catalog? And the answer always is in Maya until
It crashed.
it crashes. Exactly.
Push it to
Then
the
you've reached the threshold of its memory. So, I mean, I've had 30 and 40 images in there. You just want to make sure you're not running too much other stuff. Like I said, Photoshop, Maya's going to lose. All right, so we went over some basic image tool things to do. There are some other things we'll do. We'll kind of throw them in as you need them. You know, there's a cooler way. There's a wipe tool which lets you slide back and forth, and you can see over top of one image. We'll do that next time. I just want you guys to get the basics of everything that you need to do. All right. Any last minute questions before we go to lunch? Nope. Okay. Go to lunch, come back at, let's go 12:35. Give you a full hour. You can relax. Wear earplugs so all the information doesn't leak out of your ear.